Hi Reparationists, it's Caroline with the Fund for Reparations now. I'm going to read another 10 minutes of the executive summary of the California Reparations Task Force report. Before I begin, Fund for Reparations Now is an intergenerational collective of white allies working under the National African American Reparations Commission to see to the passage of H.R. 40, a federal bill for reparations, as well as to collect white monies for reparations today. Please visit our website at www.fundforreparationsnow.org. And now we'll begin. Part 2 of this report discusses international standards for remedying the wrongs and injuries discussed in Part 1. This well-established framework has guided the task force in the formulation of its recommendations so that they comport with the 5 elements of reparations as set by international standards: restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and non-repetition. Part 2 also provides examples of prior international and domestic efforts to provide reparations for human rights violations, such as apartheid, incarceration, and forced sterilization. In keeping with the legal framework for reparations, Part 3 discusses the required components of a formal apology and recommends how the state of California should offer a formal apology on behalf of the people of California for the perpetration of gross human rights violations and crimes against humanity against African enslaved people and their descendants. In Parts 4 and 5, the task force recommends appropriate remedies in consideration of the task force's findings, including A, how any form of compensation to African Americans, with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States, should be calculated. B, what form of compensation should be awarded, through what instrumentalities, and who should be eligible for such compensation, and C, whether any other forms of rehabilitation or restitution to African descendants are warranted, and what form and scope those measures should take. The latter includes recommendations that the legislature enact a range of policies needed to guarantee restitution, compensation, rehabilitation, satisfaction, and non-repetition. Part 6 of the report contains a summary of the task force's findings and recommendations regarding implementation of the California Racial Justice Act, Assembly Bill number 2542, 2019-2020 registered session. And Part 7 summarizes findings from community engagement and community input regarding reparations and the work of the task force. Part 8 recommends appropriate ways to educate the California public about the task force's findings and of the legacy of enslavement and legal discrimination in California. Finally, Part 9 contains a compendium of California laws and policies that have had a significant impact in the development of the state and nation's unjust legal systems, including those that have subjugated and continue to disproportionately and negatively affect African Americans as a group and perpetuate the lingering material and psychosocial effects of slavery. Taken together, the components of this report are not only intended to satisfy the requirements the legislature set out in AB 3121, but also serve as a blueprint for other states and eventually the federal government when they perform the critical task of atoning for this nation's victimization of African Americans, especially those who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States. While California's first-in-the-nation effort is an important step, the task force eagerly anticipates the legislature's enactment of the recommendations contained herein. This national shame can ultimately be comprehensively redressed only through national reparations. AB 3121 authorized the task force to hold public hearings to pursue its mission. In order to inform the contents of its report, the task force held 16 public meetings, during which it considered public comments, expert and personal witness testimony, in addition to considering the voluminous materials submitted to the task force via email from those unable to attend the meetings. In total, the task force heard over 48 hours of testimony from 133 witnesses, as well as over 28 hours of public comment in the course of its meetings, and received approximately 4,000 emails and 150 phone calls. When discussing issues as complex as race and reparations, precision is paramount. Precision helps ensure that the writers and the reader begin in the same place to arrive at the same understanding. As described later in this report, words have been weaponized throughout American history to dehumanize African Americans. Words can also be used to mend, to acknowledge, to respect, and to uplift. To that end, this report defines and adopts the following terms throughout its pages. The N-word. The word, quote, Nigger, end quote, has been used for centuries to dehumanize African Americans. The terms, quote, Negro and, quote, colored person, as opposed to, quote, person of color, although adopted by African American communities for periods of time, have since been recognized as derogatory terms. When quoting historical documents, this report will quote these words, not to condone the words or their vicious meanings, but to present them in the context in which these slurs were used. The California legislature enacted AB 3121, recognizing that the lasting wounds of enslavement and discrimination cannot begin to mend until these wounds are first addressed. In that same spirit, this report quotes these terms, recognizing that reparations or any other answer to racism cannot be complete until this report squarely faces the horrors of enslavement and the systemic discrimination that followed and persists today. White supremacy. White supremacy is a system of belief and power that white people are superior to other races. This report confronts the idea of white supremacy and the various forms that it takes. When discussing the concept of white supremacy, the report uses the term to refer to two concepts. First, this report uses the terms white supremacy or white supremacists to identify groups or individuals who believe that white people are superior to people of other races. When used this way, white supremacy describes individual prejudice. Examples of white supremacist groups, including groups that exist to this day, include, for example, the Ku Klux Klan. Second, this report uses the term white supremacy in the American context to describe the racist premise upon which social and legal rules and practices are formed with the intention of discriminating or enacting violence against African Americans, among other marginalized groups. This report also uses it to describe cultural images and stereotypes that reinforce prejudices against African Americans and others. When used this way, white supremacy describes forms of racism that extend beyond individuals or organizations, a form of racism often described as structural or systemic racism. As this report demonstrates, the fundamental political, social, and economic system of our country negatively impacts African Americans regardless of the intent of any one person to be racist. This term does not use the term white supremacy to describe white people as a group, white Americans, or white Californians. Not all white people are white supremacists. Anyone, regardless of race, with or without intent, consciously or unconsciously, can engage in acts of white supremacy or be a part of a racist system. A racist system harms all who live in it, even those who may have historically reaped the benefits of the system. Throughout the report, we use words that center the people discussed. Rather than refer to slaves, this report refers to enslaved persons. Most historians now refer to enslaved persons instead of slaves because the term slave reduces the enslaved person to an object. Instead, historians use enslaved person to grant agency and recognition to the enslaved individual and to remind us about the violence and inhumanity of slavery. Thanks for listening along with me. I invite you to sit in your chair comfortably now, to maybe put your hands on your legs, to feel yourself seated, and to take a deep breath. And again. What did you hear in what I was reading? The two things that really stuck out for me were words really matter, which is why we are going page by page through this executive summary to listen to these words as they were so carefully written by the task force. And they are going to use the N-word as written in historical documents, and in my readings, I will be spelling the N-word. I'm not comfortable reading it out loud, even if it's in historical text. It's my understanding that that's the right thing for me to do, and so that's what I'm going to do. And also, I really like how they broke down enslaved person. Certainly, as a younger person, I was raised to say slaves, and people are people, and they are people who were done to, and I want their agency to be preserved. And so I look forward to seeing how the authors make that happen. And how did it feel? How are you feeling listening to this report? Are you feeling uncomfortable? Are you feeling excited? Are you feeling disappointed, ashamed, guilty, fearful, just uncomfortable? Words matter. And our state and our nation will be changed for these words. So thank you for joining me in reading them, and I'll see you again soon for the next 10-minute installment.